The year is 1000 BCE, and you are a Babylonian king preparing to go to war with the Assyrians. You've gathered your troops, you've begun to stockpile supplies, you've discussed strategies with your commanders, and you've given offerings at the temples. But you're missing one final thing. You need to seek guidance from the gods, and you need to know if they predict that you will be successful or not in battle. But how do you do this? You must seek the assistance of a diviner, also known as a baru, to divine the future and see if the gods are in your favor or not. The methods the diviner will use depends on what type of diviner they are. Some will examine the movements of the heavens, others will study the behavior of birds as they fly, others will watch oil as it drips into a cup of water. But the most important diviner, and the one that we have the most information on, are ones that will examine the entrails of a sacrificial lamb, also known as Extispicy. The Babylonians took divination very seriously, and they believed that the gods would use these different natural occurrences to manifest their will. And if you made the proper offerings and asked in just the right way, then you can study these natural occurrences as omens to determine what the gods believed was in store for you. But if you made the right offerings and asked the questions just right, then they believed that the gods would use these natural occurrences to manifest omens that could tell you and the diviner what the gods had in store for you. For Extispicy, they believed that the gods would write the answers to your questions in the entrails of the sheep itself, primarily on the livers, which they believed was the most important organ to examine in one of these divination rituals. This is what I will be showing you today. I will be showing you how the diviners would examine a sheep liver in order to determine the future. Now, as a king, you would come to me, a diviner, and we would both gather up our scribes, and we would sit down and have a long discussion about what questions you want asked, and we would make sure that the phrasing of these questions was just right. The reason is because in Mesopotamia, the gods were considered to be very fickle beings. One month they would give you a bountiful crop, and then the next month they would wash your house away in a flood. This was also important because they treated these divination rituals the way that we would treat a court case today. You were calling down the gods, Shamash and Adad, to judge your case and to answer truthfully. So they needed to make sure that everything was just perfect so that you could get the answers that you were seeking. Once all the questions were established, then you, as the king, would go back to your palace and wait for the priests and their scribes to come back to you and tell you what they found in the liver of the sheep. But that's not interesting, so let's see exactly what that would look like. O Samas, I washed my mouth and my hands. I wiped my mouth with compact cedar resin. I wrapped pure cedar resin in the locks of my hair. Being now clean, to the assembly of the gods I shall draw near for judgment. O Samas, Lord of judgment, O Adad, Lord of ritual acts and of divination, in the ritual act I prepare in the extispicy, I perform, put you truth. O Samas, I am placing in your incense pure cedar resin. Let the fragrance linger. Let it bring here the great gods. In the ritual act I prepare, in the extispicy I perform, put you truth. O Samas, I here have for you water from the Tigris and the Euphrates, which has carried from the mountains cedar and cypress. For you, wash up, valiant Samas, and let the great gods wash up with you, and wash you up. Bunene, messenger of justice, before Samas the judge. O Samas, I here have for you the pick of select pure water for the flour mush. O Samash, Lord of judgment. O Adad, Lord of ritual acts and divination, you who have seated on golden chairs, you are eating from the plates of lapis, you will descend here and eat. You will be seated on the chair and pronounce judgment. In the ritual act I prepare, in the extispicy I perform, put you truth. O Samas, I here have for you the tribute for lordship, which in the house of the gods I shall present for you. Samas, Lord of judgment, O Adad, Lord of ritual acts and divination, you who are seated on golden chairs, you are eating from plates of lapis, you will descend here and eat. You will be seated on the chair and pronounce judgment. In the ritual act I prepare, in the extispicy I perform, put you truth. Samas, I here have for you 7 and 7 unleavened loaves. Samas, Lord of judgment, O Adad, Lord of ritual acts and divination, you who are seated on golden chairs, you who are eating from plates of lapis, you will descend here and eat. You will be seated on the chair and pronounce judgment. In the ritual act I prepare, in the extispicy I perform, put you truth. O Samas, I here have for you, who the plenty of the gods, the glory of Nisaba, O Samas, Lord of judgment, O Adad, Lord of ritual acts and divination. In the ritual act I prepare, in the extispicy I perform, put you truth. O Samash, I made lie down for you the plenty of the gods, the glory of Nisaba, O Samas, Lord of judgment, O Adad, Lord of ritual acts and divination. In the ritual act I prepare, in the extispicy I perform, put you truth. Be seated, valiant Samas. Let there be seated with you the great gods. Anum, the Father of heaven, Sin, the King of the crown, Nergal, the Lord of the weapon, Inanna, the Lady of battle, let there be seated with you in the ritual set I prepare, in the extispicy I perform, put you truth. Alright, the rest of this video is going to be pretty off the cuff because I didn't have that much time to prepare for it, but I'll get into that later. Now, in order to actually read the liver itself, we need to have access to the rules about how these priests would read these livers and what these meant. For this, I'm going to be using the research of Ola Koch, who produced this book called Babylonian Liver Omens, as well as another one of her books that I had to look at while at the Library of Congress. These books are translations and commentary about the manual that the Babylonians ended up producing about liver omens. Before this, liver divination was a practice that was mostly passed on and taught through oral traditions. And when the Babylonians came around, they decided to put a lot of time and effort into establishing a standard canon of rules and ended up producing a series of tablets that acted as a manual to teach priests how to read the organs of sheep, and as well as provide a basic reference that can be looked at for priests doing these divination rituals. And a lot of these tablets survived, and it's how we know so much about this. This whole process of writing things down effectively turned this practice into a science, and the liver omens are considered to be a feat of scientific effort when it comes to the Babylonians. So we actually have a lot of information about this thanks to them. Now, just to go over the basics, they broke the liver up into multiple different categories that you can see here. And what we are looking for is not only to make sure that the features of the liver are correct, but also we're looking for anything like fissures or pustules or warts or fat globules that are not in their correct spot, things like that. All of these, depending on where they show up on the liver, mean different things. And as a general rule, they would divide the liver up to the left and the right, as well as the top and the bottom, with the left side having to do with the enemy, the right side having to do with your own people, the top being good and the bottom being bad. And how this works exactly will make a little bit more sense when we go into it. So I'm going to put this to the side. Now, the reason I wasn't able to prepare for this was because it's normally supposed to be done with a sheep liver, or the liver of a lamb, but older sheep were also used. My lamb guy ended up falling through at the last minute, and I had to spend several days looking for a replacement and ended up having to settle for a intact beef liver, which is surprisingly difficult to find. Now cows and sheep have similar livers. It's just beef livers are noticeably bigger than sheep liver, and it's why I'm doing this on the floor, because I don't trust the glass table that I have. So yeah, and that is, well, if you are squeamish when it comes to blood or organs, you probably shouldn't be watching the rest of this video, but this is what we're dealing with. So I have looked over this already and taken some notes. That way this can go by a lot quicker. Otherwise, we would be here for a very long time. Now, looking at this liver, we can see that the right side is bigger than the left side, which is a good sign. And in terms of war, that typically means that your army will be able to overpower the enemy. We also see that it's very swollen. There's not a lot of indentation, and that was also good. Again, that indicates that your army will be massive compared to the enemy's army. And in fact, on this side, we can see some indentation as opposed to over here where we don't see a lot of it. So this is really good. We also see, now, this is not a fully intact liver. We have the gallbladder as well as this portion up here cut out, as well as some stuff down here. But I am choosing to interpret that as this chunk being missing. Now, all the chunks that are missing have to do with the left side of the liver, which is bad for your army. That means that it's bad for the enemy, which is good for you. So already, this is looking good for us, for the king that came to us. Now, the next part that is typically examined is the presence. Now, the presence, as well as a lot of features on this liver, are going to be very difficult to see on camera because they have to do with grooves that you can only see when you are looking at it under a certain light. But the presence is this groove that we see coming along here. You might be able to see that it splits along here. Now this groove, known as the presence, is very long, which is good. But it splits down here at the end, which can be seen as a bad thing. But we'll talk about this later. We also see that it's bent downward, which is good. And we also see that it comes all the way down and meets with another feature that we'll talk about later called the yolk. And that also may be good or bad depending on other things that we'll discuss later. Now, the presence feature of the liver has to do with the god's favor. Now, we have some features that might change the outcome, but so far we're seeing mostly positive things, which means that the gods are in your favor. Now, the next part is called the path. The path is another one that's hard to see, and it's this groove up here. We don't really see anything that has to do with any like fissures or breaks or anything like that, but we do see that it's very long, which is also good. Now, the path has to do with your army and things that concern your army, so it being long is a good thing. And that's about all we see with the path. Next is the pleasing word, another groove that it's difficult to see that comes along here. This is long, which is good, and it's bent downward, which is also good. Now, the pleasing word has to do with oral matters, like receiving good news, which is what this most likely means. But it can also have to do literally with like oral hygiene, like if it was short or broken, then it might mean that your teeth will fall out. But this is long and continuous, which means that you'll receive good news and have good oral hygiene. Next is something called the palace gate. Let me try to find it again. The palace gate is this feature that should be easy to see right here. Now the palace gate is large, which is good. And it also has this membrane here, which is something that's also seen as good. It's considered to have to do with protection. Now, the palace gate has to do with court affairs, And this typically means, because we see all these positives, that this war will go over well in court, or that this war will result in some good favor in the court itself. Next, we have the gallbladder. Now, the gallbladder was removed, but I choose to interpret that as the gallbladder is missing. The gallbladder missing is actually very bad and has the ability to effectively turn this whole thing into a bad negative reading, possibly. It depends, but the gallbladder missing is seen as a very bad omen. Now, next we have something called the defeat of the enemy army, and that is a groove that would normally be up here, but we have this missing, and again I'm choosing to interpret that as it just being missing rather than cut out, and that is very bad for your enemy because it has to do with the left side of the liver. But so that means that it's good for us. It means that the enemy's army will be lacking. Next we have the finger. Now the finger is this feature right here, this flap of meat, and the fact that it exists is considered to be a bad thing in general. We also have, well, even though it exists, we have this section right here that's missing, which is good. That's good for us because it's reducing the finger. Now, we can also see these gashes, these fissures here. Now, we have the, when we look at the finger, it is like all the rest of the liver. Specific features are also divided up into left, right, top, and bottom, as well as middle. Now, fissures are seen as bad, and 2 fissures are seen as very bad. Now, if these fissures happened on the left side, that would be good for us because they have to do with the opposing side. But on the right, because they exist here on the right, that's very bad for us. Now, the finger has to do with more sinister and underhanded forms of the court. What exactly this means is kind of up in the air, but it has to do with more like darker, underhanded dealings when it comes to the court. Things that happen under the table, so to speak. So this is very bad for us. It means that there will be a lot of underhanded things happening our way. Now the last feature that we're able to examine is the yolk. And that is this section right here. Now, the yolk, as we look at it, I mean, you might not be able to tell, but everything looks pretty normal. Nothing's wrong with it, and that's good. The yolk has to do with matters of like the city as a whole. So the fact that everything here looks normal is good. It means that the city is going to be probably unaffected by the war. And that's what we have for examining the liver. Now, what I did was a very basic examination. What would happen next is we would take all of these features, all of these omens that I talked about, add them up, and if there are more good omens, then that means the whole prediction will be good. So in terms of war, it means that if there are more good omens, then we will be successful in war. If there are more bad omens, then we will be unsuccessful in war. But not only do we add everything together as a whole, we will also be looking at previous liver omens and examining them to see what similar omens meant not only from a predictive standpoint, but comparing to what actually happened in history. So I would take these omens that I just told you, and I would then compare the features of the liver to notes taken from previous liver omens about similar questions about war. Because each uh, liver divination ritual, the scribes would take extensive notes and keep a record of everything that happened and all the features seen here, and they would use that to compare and contrast with future rituals that are taking place. Again, turning this into very much a science. So I'm going to do a little bit of that and get back to you. Now, before we talk about the conclusions of the divination ritual, I should let you know that normally the diviner would have read omens from the entire sheep, including the heart and the lungs and the intestines, as well as they would have observed the behavior itself of the sacrificial sheep before sacrificing it, how it acted and how it behaved. But I haven't done this because the tablets that pertain to that information are either not really well preserved, are not published yet because they haven't been translated or examined, or they just don't really provide a lot of information. Also, trying to buy a whole live sheep would have been really expensive, especially on short notice. And as I said, my sheep guy fell through at the last minute. But I have checked my notes. I have compared to previous rituals and looked through the historical notes of the previous scholars, and I have come to a conclusion. Now, before I talk about that, I also want to mention the reason that this ritual has to do with war is because the vast majority of previous rituals were done to answer questions about war. Now, you could ask questions about anything, like, is your wife lying to you, or how well do you think a certain business endeavor will turn out? But by and large, the most popular question asked had to do with war and how a battle would go in your favor, whether it would be in your favor or not. So that's why we're talking about war. So, comparing to my notes and previous rituals, the king's army will be large and strong compared to the enemy's army. Your army, will surround your enemy and crush them in battle, and the war will go over well in court. The other nobles will be very much in your favor, at least on the surface, but you will receive a lot of underhandedness and subterfuge heading your way. But do not worry, because the gods are on your side and will watch over you, your army, and the city. Although you will encounter a great loss. This is because of the missing gallbladder. We don't know exactly what kind of loss it will be, but it will be great. But overall, you will win the war. Now, the Mesopotamians didn't believe in fate, at least not the same way that we do. They didn't think that the future was set in stone, and if a ritual gave you omens that you didn't like, then you could find out from the priest how to undo those omens or how to avoid them. This usually involved, special offerings or wearing certain pendants, but it could also involve just re-strategizing your battle plans with your commanders or taking some other form of regular normal action. Now, either way, if you didn't like the omen, you could go off and do the things that I just described, and then come back later but still before the battle, and redo the ritual to see if the god's favor has changed. But either way, that will do it for today's ritual. If you liked it, then good luck in battle. You appear to you will accomplish great things according to the gods. But if you want to avoid that great loss and avoid that subterfuge, you can give some offerings at the temple. You can perform some anti-witchcraft rituals. You can have a special pendant made for you, and you can go and discuss with your generals what to do next. But that will conclude today's ritual. Good luck.